Hi, this is Radial artist Justin Gray, and I'm here today to show you the PZ Pre, which is a relatively new product by Radial that is absolutely wonderful. I'm using it for most of my touring across India. This instrument is called the Bass Veena, and is an invention of mine. It's a fretless electric bass that was designed and created to be more appropriate for traditional North Indian classical music, but also styles of Indo-jazz and original music that I've composed with the instrument. It was built by Canadian Luthier Les Godfrey, and one interesting aspect is that the instrument has multiple outputs. It actually has 3 outputs, and in a different video that you can find, I'm showing you how I'm using the Radial Pro RMP and the twin ISO in a unique setup where I can use all 3 of those outputs, which is 2 piezo pickups and 1 magnetic. But for most of my performance scenarios and the vast majority of all rehearsals, all of my practicing, I'm using the PZ Pre. It's a lot smaller, and it does such an incredible job for even just creating an incredible sound based on 2 outputs that I couldn't be happier. I do have a tone bone at home, a bass bone that I've been using for years, and the minute that this came out, I knew that it would work perfectly for the Bass Veena. What I'm going to show you now, I've got the magnetic pickup going into input 2 with the piezo booster off, and I've got the harp piezo pickup, which is a purely passive piezo, going into input 1 with the piezo obviously selected. I'm going to perform for you now, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of how I'm using it and some of the wonders of the PZ Pre. This is a composition I've written called First Offering, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. So as I mentioned, in that performance, I'm using a magnetic pickup for the bass strings, the main playing strings, and a piezo pickup for the harp strings. Now the beautiful part about the PZ Pre is it's designed for piezo pickups, and the boosting does an amazing job. I mean, I'm only having to use about 50% to get an excellent, clear, beautiful sounding signal for the piezo. But also, with the piezo boosters off, the PZ Pre is serving the same purpose as my bassbone. These bass strings are sounding huge, very natural, very warm, and the tonal control is allowing me to basically have a bassbone and a piezo preamp in one. So from a bass player standpoint, this is an incredible product for that reason. In terms of the EQ, I'm using very little lows. I love the fact that there's a frequency sweep for the mids. I think that's an excellent addition. That way I'm able to find just the type of mids that I want. And similarly, if you were using the product, I think that you'd appreciate that parametric option as well. And I'm boosting the highs because I'd like to get that clarity of the harp through, as well as some of the attack and the techniques that I'm using on this instrument. In terms of the phase switch, it hasn't really been an issue for me, but in certain scenarios that's incredibly helpful. I do use the boost quite often when I'm playing with tablas or I'm playing with drums. Sometimes if I'm playing solo portions, it doesn't need to be so loud, but then I bring in the boost. Obviously the effects loop is there as well, which is something that I've used a lot on the bassbone, but in my touring in India, I'm not really using any effects with this instrument. I just want it to sound as acoustic as possible, so I haven't had to use that. The notch EQ, again, because this is an electric instrument, I haven't had any issues with feedback, and the piezos are very much embedded in the instrument, so feedback is impossible. But if I was using any sort of microphone, even in the future, I might consider miking the harp because it has quite a nice sound. That would be very, very helpful. I do use the low cut from time to time, especially on stages that are hollow, where certain low frequencies are just way too much, which I think is amazing because the PZ Pre is designed for piezo instruments and not necessarily just designed for bass, but there's so many lows that are present that it's amazing that they've thought about adding that low cut, and it can be helpful for a lot of reasons. The tuner out is something that I'm not using here because I'm often playing with drones. However, it's a very helpful feature. And the last extremely helpful feature is the out pre-EQ and the out post-EQ. I think that this is an absolute genius idea. A lot of times, sometimes you want to EQ something and you'd like the house to sound exactly how you've done it. Maybe you're working with a sound engineer who doesn't quite understand what you're looking for. This gives you a little bit of control. But sometimes you're working with a sound person where you want something on stage, but they need something different, and you trust their opinion, and you trust their ears, and then you can give them the pre-EQ. So that choice, I think, is an excellent option. It also gives you the option to send two things. I'm actually, because of the grounding issues in India, I'm using the out post EQ, which is a balanced signal, with an XLR into the Pro RMP, which is a passive reamper. Then that 1/4 inch is going into my amp. What this is allowing is it's allowing me to send this balanced signal into my amplifier, and the reason I'm doing that, the post EQ obviously so I can use the EQ, but this way I can use a ground lift, because if I do just go from the output, it works completely perfectly, the sound is excellent, but oftentimes in India the grounding is almost 90% very, very, very bad, so I get buzzing issues, etc., etc. So rather than having to manually ground it, I can use this output and send it through this other reamper into the amp, and I have a ground lift, which is extremely helpful. So again, just to give you a couple examples, I mean, here is just the bass portion. So from a bass playing standpoint, the sound is clear, it's huge, and it sounds, actually the preamps are incredible. They're giving a really nice color to the sound. Just to get the harp happening, just so you can just hear that. First, if you can hear this, you know, the camera's about 5 feet away, but the way that that sounds, as I turn it up, it's almost the exact same, just amplified, which is what every preamp should do. It should be almost colorless, and it should allow the sound of the instrument to be heard. And this being specific for piezos, it's doing an incredible job. Now the one thing I am going to also show you is, I'm just going to switch here. I'm going to put the other piezo, which is in the bridge of my instrument, and so I'm going to swap that. I'm just going to press the piezo boost button here. I'm going to swap that in, and you can just hear what two piezos sound like with the bass. It's very common in guitars to have this. It's very common for a lot of instruments, and between these two, now you can get an extremely acoustic sound out of an instrument. And once again, this is an testament to the preamps and the sound quality of the PZ Pre. So. The versatility, the quality, the control, and most importantly, the size. This is just absolutely incredible. I'm so thankful for Radial for having so much thought being put into this, and it's my great pleasure to be using the PZ Pre, and I hope that this has helped you to maybe understand how it can help you to express the music that you want to express. Thanks for listening.